Spider-Man, Jon Stewart, Walking Dead, and Better Call Saul. That and the politics of Oscars on Burnt Popcorn.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dave Mace-Curia.
And I'm Tony Thomas.
Welcome to another edition of Burnt Popcorn. So let's get right into it. Spider-Man. Tony,
Well, as we talked about last week, the possibility of Marvel and Sony reaching a deal on Spider-Man, and lo and behold, a couple days after the podcast, that happened. It broke late into the night.
Shocking.
Yes. So it looks like Spider-Man is going to come back to the Marvel movies.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and this was something that I don't think many people anticipated, because this is something that's a little bit unusual in the film industry. We were both speculating that, Sony, because of its, financial situations or whatever, was just going to outright sell the property to Disney Marvel. Well, apparently not the case. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what that situation is?
So IGN has a really good rundown on the Sony Spider-Man deal. So this is more of a leasing of the character to Marvel. Marvel isn't paying anything, even though they offered Sony billions of dollars to outright buy the character back.
Did they actually give an actual number?
Like in terms of how much money they were offering?
A guesstimate, yeah.
No, everybody's been reporting billions. So it probably would have been
I knew it was going to be a ridiculous
very hefty number to buy this character back. So the interesting thing is, Sony isn't going to make any money off of the Marvel films that feature Spider-Man, and Marvel isn't going to make any money off of the Sony movies that are going to feature Spider-Man. So this is kind of like, a rental of the character almost, where both sides get money.
This is bizarre.
But Marvel, though, controls the merchandising rights to Spider-Man. So they're
Wait. How did that happen? Do you know that?
I want to say that they probably kept the merchandising rights separate from when Sony acquired the character. I could be wrong, but we'll have to look into this for next episode. But it almost seems like when Sony got the character, they only purchased the film rights nothing else.
That's exactly what it is, because the Marvel licensing division, they tend to retain, when you write a book, let's say, author usually retains the rights to merchandise and all that. And a lot of them, what they typically end up doing is they sell the merchandising rights to the movie studio, because the movie studio is usually better at promoting, stuff like merchandising and stuff like that. But Marvel being Marvel, they probably said, we're pretty good at merching ourselves, so we're going to retain those rights. I'm just going to guess that was
probably right, because they still make Spider-Man comics and other Spider-Man
T-shirts,
Spider-Man products,
dildos, Spider-Man everything.
So they kept on to that. But Spider-Man's going to appear in a Marvel movie first, and the speculation is he will be appearing in the third Captain America movie, Civil War. But I just saw today that there's a rumor that Avengers 2 Age of Ultron may see Spider-Man make a brief appearance. My presumption is, since they got the character, he's going to be tacked on into the after credits scene. Since
as soon as you said that, I'm like, that feels like it's an after credit.
Right. That's a very good tease for the upcoming films, and
it'd be crazy if they didn't do it.
Right, and that movie's pretty much completed. They're in post-production. The movie's coming out in May. They're probably not going to spend all that time and money just to insert a Spider-Man plot line into the film itself, but guarantee you it's going to be the after credit scene.
Like I said, they'd be insane if they didn't do that. I mean, everybody looks forward. It's like the new thing right now. A lot of people really look forward to these after credit scenes.
Right.
To see Spider-Man just come into one of them. Like, the audience will lose their shit.
Right, and it's going to be huge.
It's what you want to do.
Right, and Andrew Garfield is not going to reprise the role. Sony is going to control the final say over casting, because they're going to be having the standalone movies later on the line. Rumor was they did kind of pitch it to Andrew Garfield, but he didn't like where they were kind of going with it. Sony wants to go younger.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they kind of came up with some kind of scenario where Andrew could have returned, but they said they want to bring him back to his high school roots.
Yeah.
Peter Parker.
I understand that's again they really want to keep like that younger, because think about it, like if you think about the Avengers, a lot of those guys are, the youngest one I think is what, in his 30s, something like that. They definitely want, again, you want that four quadrant picture business where you want young people, teens, adults, and then
not to mention the standalone. Well, the standalones. I think the first one's supposed to come out in 2017, and by that point, Andrew would have been in his mid-30s, and any subsequent films are gonna have approaching 40-year-old Peter Parker.
I've been thinking about this, and I say four quadrant picture for a reason, Tony Thomas.
Yes.
I have a theory, and this is falling into Burnt Popcorn's tradition of having the show be about reviews, rants, and rumors. Well, here's a rumor for you, and I'm going to start this rumor. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not starting this, but it's a theory that I've heard, that I thought of, but then I saw it vindicated by other people thinking this. Here's what I think is in Sony's best interest. If they're going to continue the Spider-Man franchise, they need to explore the Spider-Man multiverse. You have the different Spider-Mans.
Yes.
You have, maybe you could even have somebody like Tobey Maguire come back and play like that Spider. And we find out that this is part of that. What was that storyline in the comic books where they had the different times and multiverses?
I know the one you're talking about. The exact name of that storyline eludes me at the moment.
Yeah. But it was on the cartoon even.
Right.
You had the weird spider lady who controlled the dimensions and stuff like that.
Yes, and God, I can't remember the name of that specific storyline, but any fan of the 90s cartoon, that was, I think, in the final several episodes of the show they did that.
It was awesome. I remember it being awesome.
Yeah.
And the big trend right now in the film industry is to have these shared universes, if you will. Sony can build literally a shared universe just from the Spider-Man property if they do that.
Right.
It's sort of like if it's sort of mixing like X-Men, like Days of Future Past, if you will,
which allow the older Magneto and Professor X and the other older characters, and they kind of fix the timeline at the end of that movie, which you can definitely do in the Sony movies.
Look what they did with Star Trek even. They had the same situation where they're taking the old franchise characters, introducing these new franchise characters.
Who sort of exist in an alternate Star Trek universe.
Exactly.
And this kind of goes along with one of the big, Twitter rumors. On Twitter, there's a big push for the new Spider-Man to be portrayed by a black actor.
They can do that as well with this.
Right. And in the Marvel Ultimate Universe, in one of those timelines, Peter Parker dies and hands off, the costume to Miles Morales, who is, from what I've read, I have not read those comics yet, but he is very well received amongst the fans. He's a very popular Spider-Man. Now, the rumors for the new Spider-Man, they've mentioned, you've mentioned his name to me, the kid from the Hunger Games.
Oh, yeah. Josh Hutcherson.
Right, as being one of the ones, and Logan Lerman from Peter Jackson, the Percy Jackson movies, as being possible Peter Parkers because they're younger. And obviously they are white, so it looks like they are going with a white Peter Parker. But that does not eliminate the possibility that down the line you can get Miles Morales somehow.
Especially with this multiverse thing. It's a very safe way for Hollywood to take a chance and put in a black Spider-Man without offending the asshole racist types that are going to get mad, no matter what, about having somebody of a different ethnicity portraying Spider-Man. And you could get it's a nice way to introduce it. And if people really like it, Miles Morales can then get a standalone movie of his own. Again, you're building that shared universe. I think it is I'm pushing Sony, please do this storyline, because we've seen all these Spider-Man stories already. We've seen multiple origins already. Give us the the multiverse storyline, because you get the literally the best of all worlds.
Right, and interestingly enough, In the regular storyline, Dr. Octopus actually becomes Spider-Man. Peter Parker dies, and he sort of inhabits Parker's body.
Well,
and that might be a bit of, but
that works for the comic book. I don't know if
right.
it would work for a movie.
Probably not.
With a multiverse, you could literally do anything.
Right, and Spider-Man has a lot of great villains that we have yet to see on film. You know, Spider-Man going up against Kraven the Hunter. There's your gritty, Christopher Nolan-esque Spider-Man plot, having him go up against one of his most ruthless and violent adversaries. Is, a lot of these comic book movies, they like going to the more realistic and gritty, violent approach, and Kraven would be perfect for that, and Carnage.
Yeah, I've always been waiting for a Carnage.
Right.
And I think they deemed, way back in the day, I think they deemed Carnage as too scary or too violent.
Yes, too violent, because
audiences.
he is, a total sociopath.
Yeah.
He is just violent, he's a killing machine, and I'd also like to see them do Venom proper. Because they really failed in the third movie. Because number one, Topher Grace did not make a good Eddie Brock, and the other issue is there just wasn't enough Venom.
Yeah.
Because I think screen time is probably less screen time than Anthony Hopkins had Silence of the Lambs, which only totaled 8 minutes. I'm going to say you probably only got maybe 4 minutes of Venom in that film.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that they could do, and I think the horizon is great for the Spider-Man franchise, especially now with them licensing it to Marvel. They get to do it with the Avengers, and hopefully Sony takes my advice and the advice of many others, and they explore that multiverse story.
I think it would be very, very interesting. And now, moving on from the exciting happy news, comes a topic that really bummed out a lot of people this week. Jon Stewart announced that he is leaving The Daily Show.
Yeah, this was I was watching it and my jaw literally dropped. It was this was earth-shattering news. I mean, I literally am somebody who grew up on Jon Stewart, and I'll tell you a little story. I actually remember the first time I ever saw The Daily Show, and it was in 1999, Jon Stewart's very first year of doing the show, and I remember I really wasn't into politics back then. My parents. The big news of the time was the Monica Lewinsky Bill Clinton thing. And I remember my parents talking about it, and it's vaguely interesting to a kid because the president's getting a BJ in the Oval Office. Even a 12-year-old could appreciate that political story. And I remember, I watched a lot of Comedy Central back then, mainly for they used to re-air SNL, old SNLs from the early 90s, even late 80s. 90s, like the Dana Carvey years, the Chris Farley years, and stuff like that. And I used to really like watching that. And then, of course, I don't know if you've ever seen The Kids in the Hall. Mm-hmm. They aired a lot of Kids in the Hall episodes. And I remember one day I was looking, I think I skipped school or something like that. And I was looking to watch a Kids in the Hall episode. And at 12, I think it was 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they re-aired The Daily Show, because they've been, they always do. They always usually re-air The Daily Show at noon or 1 o'clock or something like that. And it came on, and it was Jon Stewart, and he was doing the Monica Lewinsky story. And it was funny. I okay, all right, the news can be funny. And ever since then, I've been watching The Daily Show, and I think you and I have similar stories with that because the Bush years were a very
bleak.
trying time.
Yeah, I came across Stewart, I want to say, Indecision 2004. Mm-hmm. Around that time is when I
His glory days.
Right, when I really discovered him. I want to say maybe I saw an episode or two prior to that, but it was that last half of the Bush administration.
Yeah.
The last 4 years is when he became sort of my place of sanity in the news, of dealing with the Bush administration. And it was his way of bring a comedic light to such bleak, dark news where there was always some kind of glimmer of hope, because at least you knew there was one person out there covering these stories who was not insane.
Yeah. By the way, before like the Indecision 2004, Jon Stewart was actually one of the very, very few voices that showed any kind of discontent and even outright questioning of our motives with Iraq.
Right.
And that was crucially important because even back then, people like me who were against the Iraq War, early on, before it was cool to do it, one of our only outlets was Jon Stewart.
Right. And he also railed against the machine of the big three news stations, MSNBC, Fox News, and CNN, his famous takedown of Crossfire, how he rallied against this kind of manufactured outrage that news media corporations fostered on people, where essentially you weren't getting real news, you were getting infotainment, you're getting a guy on the left and a guy on the right just arguing about nonsense back and forth, and they never got into the big picture. It was meant to divide, and it was meant to, create an air of hostility towards both sides.
Yeah, and it's sad to say. I mean, as important as that was, I don't know if he succeeded. I think we're now in the point now, and it's sad because we're now at the point where people who are on the left and people who are on the right, most of the time, they can't even talk to each other anymore. Like, I have friends that are Republicans, but I'll tell you, I don't even like talking about politics anymore.
Right.
It's so hard to do it.
Right, and I find it the same way, especially on social media, where you have that comfort zone of hiding behind a computer screen where it's not like you're arguing to them face to face, and the hatred is really what's there. There's a hatred of Democrats. There's a hatred of Republicans.
But I think at the same time, one of the only things that's a cure to that is what Jon has been doing, comedy.
Right.
You look at because like at this point, you have two choices. You can look at the news and you can get like foaming at the mouth mad, or you. And by the way, I did that for many years, and it got me nowhere. The only way that you can cope with it in this world is through an intelligent but comedic approach, honestly, because this is even if you approach the topic from a comedic point, even people who disagree with you will at least listen to you.
Right.
You're not coming off as like aggressive or it's easier to approach the conversation if it's through a comedic perspective.
Right. And the other great thing about Jon Stewart was his ability to achieve catharsis on the show with many emotional events. Probably one of his most watched bits is the first show after 9/11, where, he has a very emotional monologue. I'm sure you've seen it.
Yep.
And, that was probably one of the first, a show that was total, comedy. They did, do a lot of news, but, that was one of those moments where you watch late night TV, and that was one of the first moments where you realize it's okay to laugh again, and that you can, have fun with the horrors of going on in the world. And, to Stewart's credit, he became I remember him being a figure for criticism from Bill O'Reilly. O'Reilly hated Stewart, and a lot of people on Fox News hated because he was one of the few people willing to call them out on their bullshit in the media.
He was he was one of the first people to really put it out there into the consciousness of the people. This isn't news.
Right, and to a point you kind of get that on, from some of the commenters on MSNBC, but they don't go for the jugular that Stewart did.
You remember back in the days, like Fox News even used to, they have the slogan "fair and balanced."
Yes.
Jon Stewart, I'm trying to remember. I mean, occasionally I'll watch like the different like I'm a news junkie. I'm not gonna lie, and I watch the different ones like MSNBC, Fox, CNN. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember seeing Fox News calling themselves fair and balanced. I mean, maybe they still do. Maybe I don't watch it enough, but it's not. I don't think they do it as much anymore. It's not as pronounced. I mean, every 5 seconds, Fox News fair and balanced back in the early 2000s.
Right, especially in the first half of the Bush administration.
Yeah, no, but yes, and it was during the Bush administration that they were really pushing that fair and balanced slogan. But with Jon Stewart making fun of it constantly and showing the hypocrisy of it, I don't think they do it anymore. I think that guy alone broke their mentality.
Right. I want to say that he did, and I remember when the Bush administration ended and Obama was elected. There was a big conversation if the Daily Show could survive with a Democratic administration. I remember a lot of my Republican friends sneered like, "Well, how can Jon Stewart survive? He's not going to last. He's not going to be able to be as funny anymore." I'm like, well, look, first off, Republicans are always going to be saying stupid shit for him to make fun of. Yeah. And you know what? I think he's going to be fair. And he was.
He was very fair.
Especially with his coverage on the Obama administration's stance on domestic spying in the beginning. Oh, yeah. He was very hard on them for their hypocrisy on the NSA and the CIA spying on us.
Yeah.
And I want to say even recently towards the end with the situation in ISIS in Syria, he was critical of kind of like the Obama administration's use of fake language to sort of posture themselves moving towards war. And we're seeing that right now. This American hostage that died recently, it seems like she's going to be the rallying cry for ISIS. And I just want to throw this out here. The Obama administration has been trying to get a war declared for ISIS prior to the hostage dying.
Yeah, this is nothing new.
But, everybody needs something to rally on.
Right.
And I have the feeling that she's going to be the rallying cry for the administration.
Could be. But as far as Jon Stewart goes, and it turns out, ironically enough, to the great chagrin of Fox News, that perhaps the most fair and balanced person in the media is Jon Stewart.
Right.
And people wonder, like, you see a lot of media criticism nowadays, where the news, the mainstream news outlets, they get really pissed off when people say, I get my news from Jon Stewart.
Right.
Is there any fucking wonder why people say that? Because you take a look at MSNBC, and MSNBC basically has become what Fox News was for the Bush administration, it has become for the Obama administration. And there's a level of there are some voices within MSNBC that don't basically work for Organizing for America or something like that, but by and large it's very hard to trust the mainstream news outlets because they are riddled with agendas, and you see it. I mean, it's clear. It doesn't take a lot of imagination on my part or your part to understand that. And yeah, people do get their news from Jon Stewart, and I think that, and I'm a news junkie. I went to school for journalism, way back in the day, and I've got to say this: it is absolutely valid for someone to say, I get my news from Jon Stewart. Now, hopefully they're not getting all of their news from Jon Stewart. Hopefully that they're reading something like New York Times or HuffPost or Wall Street Journal, whatever. But the broad topic, it's okay for you to say, yeah, at the end of the day, I go to Jon because he's the guy I trust. And this Brian Williams story, it just makes it absolutely clear that you are better off watching Jon Stewart than you are the mainstream news. It's just, there should be no wondering anymore. And it is absolutely valid for people to say it.
And especially when, you look at organizations that watch for media bias and you see just some of the ridiculous stories that, these groups cover. Like, Fox and Friends in the morning is a circus
Oh my
of
God.
misinformation and manufactured outrage.
Yeah.
I guarantee if Obama came out and said I'm sure he prefers Chicago-style pizza, being a man from Illinois, but I'm sure Fox and Friends would create a culture war over that if they haven't already.
Oh my God! What honestly? I'm not. This is a rhetorical question. You don't have to actually answer this. But what the fuck are the actual demographics for a show like that? Like, really? Like, what kind of fucking person?
People that wake up at 4 a.m. and people still hungover. That's my guess.
Yeah, hungover from what? What do you have to be hungover for to enjoy that show?
Very nasty liquor.
Oh my God!
So, we've seen a lot of big television names leave in the past couple of years. Letterman's leaving.
Yeah.
Colbert left. The Colbert Report. Now we have John leaving.
Yeah. By the way, everybody, I know that the past conversation has sounded basically like a funeral that we're having in honor of Jon Stewart.
He's not dead, and he's not
not
dying.
dead. No. It's just
He wants to spend time with his family, is what it seems,
and
from what he's been saying.
I'm going to admit something to the audience. I had a moment earlier this week with our good man Tony here, where I was really affected by this story, and I'm like, oh my God, the 2016 election is vastly approaching. What are we going to do without Jon Stewart? We are heading into the murk and muddle of an election that's going to be the most expensive election in history,
and with some of the most bizarre characters in politics.
I mean, but then I remembered, you know what? Have faith in Jon. Jon is not the type of guy who's going to leave us to the wolves. I'm not going to take the pessimistic view with this. Mm-hmm. I am going to take the optimistic view. Jon Stewart is a good guy. He's a smart guy. I think he's going to leave us with somebody who can handle that chair, who can handle that election. And by the way, if you think about the timing of where Jon Stewart came into The Daily Show himself, Craig Kilborn was the first host of The Daily Show. He left in 1999. That was right when the 2000 election was kicking into full gear. He let Jon sort of make a name for himself with that election. And what I think Jon is doing, for whoever and we'll talk about the possible successors, but the point that I want to stress is what I think Jon is doing is I think what he's giving to his successor is what Craig Kilborn gave to him, an election to make a name for yourself. There's a lot of material that this person, whoever it may be, has to work with now.
Right, and Jon is staying on till the end of the year, so possibly there may be a candidate he'll groom who's already on the show. So presumably he's going to have somebody to replace him who may already be on the show, and some of the past correspondents and current correspondents are some of the names being floated. Time.com listed 7 individuals who they're suggesting as alternatives to having him be replaced with a white man. That's kind of the angle of this article. So you have current correspondent Jessica Williams, and I haven't seen many recent episodes of the show, so I'm very unfamiliar with her.
There's a lot of names out there, from the current correspondents.
Right, like Samantha Bee.
Yeah, Jason Jones. They're even throwing around the idea that they'll do a double team of Samantha Bee and Jason Jones.
Right.
But honestly, there's also other big names out there, like Aisha Tyler.
Right.
There's rumors that Seth Meyers is going to be leaving his late night show and coming and possibly doing The Daily Show.
Right.
There's Tina Fey. There's Amy Poehler's name being thrown around out there.
Michael Shea, who is currently on SNL. W. Kamau Bell. All really interesting characters. And I think they have a very good pool of candidates to pull from.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like, you're trying to replace him with a complete nobody. There's people who have been on that show before who have made their names. There's people still on that show who would be very good in that sort of host role.
Yeah, a lot of people are wondering John Oliver, yes, he did get the HBO opportunity, and there's and I'm telling you right now, this is what I've heard from insiders. There's no way he's getting it because Comedy Central is miffed at him beyond belief. The rumor is that they were hinting to him that you are the heir apparent. And when they gave him that slot to host over that summer when John was making Rosewater, that this is your audition, and depending on how it turns out, this gig may be yours. And it turned out very well.
Right, because HBO offered him.
I mean, a lot of people thought what he did was great, like, really amazing, and HBO gave him the job, and he took it.
And I watched his show on last week, and I'm a big fan of the show, but I think his style is better suited for a station that gives him more creative freedom, because he's able to get away with a lot on that show.
Yeah.
In terms of covering some very big topics and covering them in a way that sort of allows him to be a little bit more vicious than perhaps the Daily Show producers would have allowed. Yeah. But there's no way he's getting out of that contract.
No. And you know what? I think he's happy with HBO.
Right. I don't see him leaving. And you got to wonder if they are going to go with sort of like the trend here is like replacing John with someone who's not another white guy and looking towards a female or an African American host, and you got to wonder if are they going to go that route.
My view is this, and I think what Comedy Central and what John, more importantly, what they're going to do is they're going to do something quite like what they did for John Oliver. They're going to give little tryouts to these possible heirs in much the same way, and they're just going to see what sticks out there. But I know this is probably the most competitive job in the world of comedians right now. Every comedian in the world wants this job. Because if you think about it, let's say Seth Meyers is not interested in the role, and he's just going to stay on MSNBC late night. All of the late night talk shows are spoken for the next decade or more.
Right, because everybody's either new or they're, Kimmel's doing well.
Yeah, there's Kimmel ain't going
Jimmy
nowhere.
Fallon is doing very, very well.
Yeah, Kimmel. Yeah.
So those two guys aren't going anywhere soon, and they're young.
Yeah.
Craig Ferguson just left, and he has his replacement.
And by the way, Craig Ferguson is one of the names being thrown around for The Daily Show as well.
Right, and that would be a very interesting sort of take, having a foreign perspective on the show.
Because they already did it with John Oliver.
Right, and Craig is insanely funny.
And he has a built-in fan base.
He does, who will follow him anywhere.
Yeah.
No matter where he goes and no matter what he does.
And here's another thing to back up the Craig Ferguson theory. Jon Stewart had a late night show on, it was either CBS or NBC.
I think NBC.
And he didn't do well. I mean, it just wasn't right for him. Mm-hmm. Craig Ferguson, he did very well, I think, on CBS.
For how late he was.
Yeah, and it's just, I don't think that format, I mean, he did great on it. No, I'm not questioning his ability. He did fantastic on it, especially when he put the robot guy in there.
Yes.
But I think, I don't think he ever, I never really saw them promote him.
It was a talk show on MTV.
It was on MTV?
Yes, yeah. The Jon Stewart Show.
He did have that, and I think he had another one. I could be making it up. I don't know. I could be mistaken. But no, I mean, Craig Ferguson, he really wasn't given a lot of promotion, I feel. And
no, he had a very cult following.
Yeah, it was a cult following.
Yeah. And they didn't really promote him
he was
all that much.
The best kept secret on CBS.
He was. And, even myself, I would find, flipping through the channels late at night, not being able to sleep, and I'm like, oh, Craig is here. I forgot about him. And he had some very big guests. He had Sir Salman Rushdie on the show. And he's able to get the hosts in, and he's very good at banter. So
I feel like I might be selling Craig Ferguson right now. I don't know. I really think there might be something to it.
Right, and I think
because he's been trying to get a show. He had like a deal in the works with Fox, I believe, and it fell through because I guess they didn't agree to the amount of money that Craig was looking for. But I'll tell you, you could do a lot worse than Craig Ferguson.
Certainly, and God, I don't know who right now, Craig is the guy that I would like to see because I can't think of anybody else. I mean, if they go in-house...
I think you have...
If they go in-house, somebody who's already been with the show, if that's who they send, like, look, if Comedy Central comes out and says, we're not considering outside candidates, we're going inside, Samantha Bee and or Jason Jones...
I think you need look, these are big shoes to fill. I think you need big feet. I really do.
Right.
It's just I love Larry Wilmore's new show.
Right, and he's not going to switch.
No.
He wants his own show. He wants his own style, and
right.
I think it works very well for him.
Yeah, the problem is that, and I know it takes time to build a show, but
right.
He's there. I just think right now with Jon we're talking about here. I mean, who's become part of American culture
right.
in a lot of ways. You're going to need a big name. I don't really think it would be a smart move to have somebody who's already on the show to do it.
Right.
I don't. I just don't. And hate me all you want, but it's just my view. You need big feet to fill big shoes.
Right. And speaking of filling big shoes, we had last Sunday one of the biggest television debuts in history, and a show that was following one of the most critically well-acclaimed series, one of the most talked about series, one of the shows that has been cited as the TV drama revival period of the last half of the 2000s.
It ushered in a golden age
of television, and Better Call Saul debuted last Sunday do you remember the numbers? They were huge.
Leading in after The Walking Dead, I believe it was over 8 million.
Right.
It was the largest cable debut ever.
Right, and a show that was so talked about and with a lot of anticipation. Can the show survive with just Saul? Can without
I knew the minute that they said that Jesse
and Walt
won't be in the first season. I knew right then and there, all right, Vince knows what he's doing.
Right.
Because he knows this show has to be able to walk on its own 2 feet.
Right. And
boy, did it ever.
Yes. What?
The
opening alone.
Let's just first talk about the opening.
Seeing him actually at the Cinnabon.
Just like, and spoiler alert for those of you who might not, the 2 people living under a rock who have not seen the Breaking Bad finale, Bob Odenkirk's character Saul Goodman, in a moment with Walt when they're in the sort of protective,
like safe room almost,
basically, had a line Walt asked Saul, so what are you going to do next? And I'm paraphrasing here. Saul said, I don't know, probably end up in Nebraska working at a Cinnabon.
And
lo and behold,
he's at a Cinnabon. And, there's a great moment at the end of the clip where he comes home and he pops in a tape that's just, a compilation of his commercials as when he was Saul Goodman. And it's very touching. It's sad in a way.
It was devastating.
Because, he's on his feet because there's a moment where he's in the Cinnabon and that guy looks at him and he thinks that this is it. He's been found. He's going to be done. He's done, and it turns out it's just some guy who's meeting up with some friends,
girlfriend or whatever.
Here's Saul, working at the cinema, and Gloria Day's behind him, constantly on edge that somebody's going to find him and kill him for.
Yeah, he's a broken man at this
right.
point.
And then they cut back to the sort of the beginning.
Let me just say like this with that opening. A lot of people who, again, maybe they're just casual viewers or whatnot, they said it looked like an art film. Let me tell you something. The whole that opening is magic.
Right.
You have to understand, and the reason why that opening occurred was because you have to be able to build sympathy. This is a writing technique, whether it be for novels, film, television,
sympathy is
whatever.
Huge in writing.
You're dealing with a character who is literally not a criminal defense lawyer, a criminal lawyer.
Right.
How do we get sympathy for a guy like this?
Right.
You show him broken.
Right.
And then you transition into the period in his life when he's like driving a shitty beater of a car, and immediately he's one of us. Jimmy McGill. He's one of us.
And outside in the real world, a guy like Saul Goodman would be, one of those ambulance chasing attorneys that everybody hates. And you're absolutely correct, establishing sympathy for him.
Absolutely.
Because in Breaking Bad, he's sort of a bit of comedic relief for some of the really dark moments in the show, and you don't really get into many moments where they create sympathy for him. He's just sort of like a character that you feel okay liking because he doesn't kill anybody.
Yeah, no, he's actually one of the more admirable morally characters. I mean, that's saying a lot, like on the show.
Right, like he didn't kill any kids. He's not dealing drugs. He's a unethical lawyer, but compared to some of the other characters on Breaking Bad, he's one of the few where you don't feel guilty actually liking.
Because if you think about it, like Breaking Bad, it followed a guy who becomes a meth lord. Okay, how do you build sympathy for a guy like that? Well, look at the first episode. The guy gets cancer. His son, who has MS, is being picked on in a store. What does Walt do? He kicks the shit out of those asshole bully types.
Right.
I fell in love with him in that scene.
Right.
And that was the point. That is why that scene is in there. It's part of the It's part of a theory of writing called Save the Cat. You have the main character in the first, act do something where they like quote save a cat or do like a good deed that builds sympathy with you, with the audience and the character. Right.
And if you were to tune into Breaking Bad in the last, half of the season where Walt becomes very vicious, the plot line with the ricin and some of the other decisions you make, you'd feel it's difficult to sympathize with a character like that. And Vince Gilligan in many interviews has stated that
you're not supposed to like
Walt. Right. Once Walt starts doing unforgivable deeds where there's no justification, where the only person that can justify it is Walt himself. Vince has said many time and time again, those are the moments where you're not supposed to feel for him. And Vince is baffled that people can like Walt at the end of the show, seeing everything that he has done, and going back to Saul here.
But at the same time, though, Vince Gilligan being the one of the great writers of our time, he does put little moments in there at the end. I think one of the most earth-shatteringly depressing, touching scenes in all of Breaking Bad is at the end, where he sees his son for the last time, and he can't even say goodbye.
Right. It's a very heartbreaking scene.
It is sympathy. It does create sympathy, but at the same time, it is showing you the cost, the true cost of what Walt did. He cannot say goodbye to his son.
Right.
And as far as, we'll get back to, Better Call Saul now. So the writers were faced with this situation. How do we build sympathy for a scumbag lawyer? I mean, there's two types of people in the world we all hate. Drug dealers and scumbag lawyers. And that just happens to be the type of people that Vince Gilligan is writing about.
Right.
And you have to build sympathy. Well, you show them as down and out and like every man, like one of us, people
Right.
that are having trouble, making ends meet, and that is exactly what they
Right.
did, and that was the best strategy.
And going into the early moments of the show, they do a good job at that when they show you his, I don't even know if you could really call it an office, in the boiler room of a nail salon.
Which is, I think, and I could be wrong. I mean, I know he has his brother's pad where he could crash,
Right.
but he has a bed in that office.
Right.
So that leads me
seems
to
like,
believe that doubles out as like a residence.
Right.
Almost.
It would seem that way, and you've got the crappy car. He seems down on his luck, especially when there's the moment where he hits the guy on the skateboard, and at that point you're just like, how can things get any worse for Saul in this episode? And bam, he hits a guy, and wrecks the windshield of his car, and very funny moment. Turns out the guys are scammers, and
and Saul calls it too.
Yes,
because Saul. No, you can't bullshit a bullshitter. And,
right.
And let me tell you, the lines that this show delivers.
Right, very.
Yeah, it's just like, slipping Jimmy. I mean, come on.
Once he realizes there's a scam, when he flips out, that's such a great moment. And, I like the little throwbacks to Breaking Bad. In that episode, you have Mike's little cameo.
Oh, yeah. No, Mike, I knew that the show was going to be great when they said Mike was going to be a major character.
Right, and to see him just briefly in that moment as the...
Well, you just restored my faith in the justice system.
Right, and moving on to the end of the episode... Tuco showing up.
Whoa!
And I did not expect him to be the one opening that door.
No.
Because I had totally forgotten.
I knew something was up.
Right, something was definitely up, especially when they showed you when they pulled away from the house. Once the guys got in, something bad.
I was literally expecting like a gunshot to go off.
Right, that's what I was thinking. Like I was thinking, the camera's panning out, and it's going to stop, and you're going to hear a bang, and
that was going to be the end of the episode.
That was going to be the end of the episode, or that was going to be the next commercial cut.
Yeah.
And when Saul goes over there and Tuco answers the door,
oh my God,
that's such. You're like, wow.
We've now come full circle.
Right, and
and then of course the second episode of Breaking Bad, which they aired.
Better Call Saul.
What did I say?
You said Breaking Bad.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Better Call Saul. The second episode. I mean, if you weren't into Better Call Saul with the first episode, you better be with this one. Because it was amazing. Even your mother, who I tried to get to watch Breaking Bad.
Right.
Didn't feel it.
Yeah.
All right? She felt this one.
Really? Yeah.
The scene where it's sort of Jimmy's first real case where he's basically talking down the sentence of Tuco's and his little scam artist friends.
Yeah.
She was laughing. And that's the magic of the show
Right.
there on full display. If that's what the show's going to be, I'm telling you, this show, I know it's soon to say this.
Right.
I know it's soon.
We're only 2 episodes in. And
I know, but let me tell you, I feel it. I feel the magic of Jimmy McGill here.
Yeah.
I think this show is headed to be possibly on equal footing with Breaking Bad.
I agree. It's off to a great start.
And here's my prediction. Depending on how this season goes, and obviously we're going to be reviewing Better Call Saul quite a bit on this show, but it's going to be really interesting to see if Bob Odenkirk is going to get his Emmy for this show.
That would, because logistically speaking, as far as dramas go, Mad Men is ending.
It's done.
So, Bob may not get it for this season. Perhaps not, because John Hamm's going to be most certainly nominated for his final portrayal of
and it's
Don
the
Draper.
Politics of the awards ceremonies,
right?
And we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. But
so, other than Mad Men ending and Breaking Bad's gone, there aren't many huge dramas. Like the only other things that I can think of that would compete against Better Call Saul, you're going to have your Netflix dramas like
House of Cards,
and then you have your HBO and Showtime Starz dramas.
But what are they going to count? Now, this is the thing. How are the Emmys going to categorize this? Is it going to be a comedy like Orange is the New Black?
True.
or is it going to be a drama? I don't know.
I don't know.
And this is that murky
Well,
territory.
this may be me speaking out loud. Isn't the the studio or the station aren't they the ones who submit it to the category? Because I remember, American Horror Story was, I want to say at first they presented it as a mini series instead of like in the actual big drama category. So I think
because they knew that was it would make sense because it's strategic.
Yeah, and I think HBO may have done that with the first season of True Detective.
Yeah,
I think they entered it into the miniseries category. No, AMC. I don't know.
It is a dramedy.
Yeah, it is a dramedy.
If you're really going to categorize it, it's a dramedy.
But unfortunately, there's no dramedy category, so they got to pick. I'm gonna say they're probably gonna do it in comedy.
I you know what? I think
because honestly, the comedic actors, it's if anybody's going to take down the Modern Family juggernaut, let it be freaking Better Call Saul.
You see, at first I was going to argue that this is I think they should go with drama. But you know what? The more I'm hearing the arguments, I'm going to say, you're probably right. I think they're going to go with comedy. I really do.
And another big AMC show returned
as
well.
The Walking Dead.
Other half of Walking Dead.
Because of our good friend Tony here being a cord cutter, he is not fully caught up with The Walking Dead.
Well, I'm caught up because people like to tweet their outrage whenever somebody dies on the show.
Yes, and this premiere of The Walking Dead had a death, and it was the death of Tyrese. And a lot of fans pissed off.
Right. Very popular character. Yes. I was shocked when you told me before we started recording that he was killed off because I really liked him. He was probably my favorite out of the new set of characters that emerged on the show.
And he was being set up to be the moral compass because after having what was why am I drawing a blank? The first, not Hirsch, but the first guy, Lenny. The early first season, you had the guy who would always sit. What was his name? The older guy?
Oh, the older guy.
I'm drawing a blank out.
Yeah, I'm drawing because his name.
Yeah. He was the moral compass, and then it passed down to Hirsch.
Yes.
He was the moral compass. Yeah. He died.
Right.
Then Tyrese.
So he kind of assumed that role.
In many ways, he became the moral compass.
Like the voice of reason, one of the few rational characters.
I think he was a deeply moral man, and he went through hell. Mm-hmm. He was a bad person who became a good person.
Right.
And I heard somebody say this. They have the new priest character, and I'll tell you what. Somebody said this, and I totally agree with it. When Hirsch delivered a sermon, you were nearly brought to tears. Mm-hmm. But when this guy delivers a sermon, you cringe. There's something not right about this guy. And I don't think he's a moral compass.
Right.
I don't know. I mean,
And, Walking Dead's one of those shows where if you have a bad feeling about a character... probably is
There's
really
reason
bad.
For it.
Like when we first met the governor, there was that kind of inkling feeling like, well, something doesn't seem right about him, and then you meet his aquarium of heads.
So I'm holding judgment on the priest, but I'm just there's something not right about him. And now I'm not gonna lie, I was pissed when Tyrese was killed. And then a day or two after it, I'm like, you know what? It makes perfect sense because the show is going in a new direction. And I think the direction that it's going in now is in very much the same vein as Game of Thrones, anybody's fair game now. Because they just killed a popular character.
Right.
And that's letting the audience know, okay.
Well, they've killed a lot of popular characters. And, Beth... very popular, the RV character whose name escapes us.
But think about it, the last 2 episodes, 2 major popular characters killed.
Right.
It's sending a signal to the audience that This is how it's going to be from here on out, folks.
Right.
You guys are saying, you know what, you keep doing the same thing. Oh, the group gets caught by this. They have to break out again. They have to well, fuck you guys. You guys were bitching. Well, guess what? It's now Game of Thrones now, bitch. A lot of these characters are up fair game now. And I'm telling you right now, with who the next possible villains are, a lot of people are fair game. And by the way, I'm not even just talking about the saviors with Negan, because there's another theory out there. Here's another rumor. If you go back to season 3, where Rick meets up with oh my God, why am I drawing a blank? The man from the very first episode, the black man from the very first episode.
I think his name was T-Dog or something.
No.
Oh no, I'm thinking of the other guy.
The neighbor guy.
The neighbor guy. Yes, I forget his name.
Yeah. He said in the episode that he was in, he described a group of people who would wear the faces of the dead.
I think I remember who you're talking about, and early on with the show, there was a lot of shock and outrage whenever a popular character dies.
But here's the thing. So no matter what we're looking at, with the villains who are coming, whether it be the group of people called the Whisperers, they're the people who cut off the faces of the dead, put it on their face. Now, this is very new in the comic book series. This is actually who I believe the present antagonists are.
Right.
If they do the switcheroo where they take something from the comic book series later and put it now, that's going to really alter the show. Right. And it's gonna be very bloody, because these are not nice people. They wear the faces of the dead. They walk among the dead. They're symbolic of total loss of civilization. Right. Total loss, where the living become acting like the dead. It's a symbolic motif. And no matter what, if the saviors come, and when they do come, and as I don't know if any of you watched At Midnight, which is Chris Hardwick's show on Comedy Central, the creator of the Walking Dead, Robert Kirkman, was one of the panelists on At Midnight. And it's like a little game show, and think of like Jeopardy, and the panelists have to respond with an answer. Well, the question was, provide us with a fake spoiler for The Walking Dead. And Robert Kirkman was not joking. Dead-faced said, a guy named Negan is going to come and he's going to kill Glenn with a baseball bat. The audience, you heard the gasps in the audience, and Chris Hardwick's face. You can tell, and by the way, spoiler, that happens in the comic book. Right. That is how Glenn dies. I think that's yet more proof that Robert Kirkman is signaling to the audience, anybody's fair game. Right.
And they have sort of played around with the chronology of the comics. Shane dies a lot sooner in the comics than he does on the show. And I want to say that Herschel also dies very early on into the conflict with the governor. That one escapes you, but I don't think even he lasted as long as he did on the show. So they have changed things around. So I wouldn't be surprised if they sort of pull from what's going on now and make it work for the show, because there's a lot. It's a huge. There's a lot of issues in the comic book. It's a very huge story.
And that would probably be a smart move, because you want to extend the life of the show. Right. And look, I don't think it's any stretch of the imagination that the aforementioned Negan is, probably the big bad of the entire series.
Yeah, and Kirkman has said in interviews that he's going to keep writing the comic book until he runs out of interesting story ideas to place these characters in. So, unlike Game of Thrones, there's going to be a wealth of material for The Walking Dead to pull from for quite some time. So, this might be a situation of the show ending before the comic book does. Yeah. Unlike unlike Game of Thrones.
It's possible. And just a couple more little notes about where The Walking Dead is, and we'll transition on into the next subject. There was a scene in the premiere where you had Tyrese hallucinating and hearing on the radio that there was a group of people going across, and apparently this was occurring like right when civilization was still there but falling apart.
Right.
There was a group of people going around terrorizing people, massacring people, and you transpose that with the community that they walked into in the episode. At first you thought that everybody in that little wealthy little suburb town was killed by walkers. Oh no. It became very apparent these people were killed by people, and one of the dead people lying clearly, and I don't want to spoil too much, but clearly it was a baseball bat that bashed somebody's head out.
Right.
And then when they found all the corpses that were literally cut in half.
Right.
It was clearly done by people.
Right.
So again, that's more building up to the saviors, I'm going to guess, with that particular one, but we shall see.
Yes, we shall see. And, we shall see, well, this is going to be the lamest transition ever, but we shall see the Oscars next week.
Oh, yes.
Very early this year. The past couple of years have been in March,
Timing
early
is always
March.
Weird with the awards ceremonies,
Yeah.
I find. And, it all depends on,
Yeah, what's going on. And, this Oscars, not without controversy.
Has there ever been an Oscars without controversy? Going back to the days of Marlon Brando. I mean, come on.
Oh, true, yes.
And that's part of the fun. I mean, I agree.
Yeah, and the controversy this year is over the whiteness of the Oscars. Among others, yes. You have Anne Duvernay not nominated for Selma, despite Selma being nominated for Best Picture. You have David Oyelowo not nominated for Best Actor. You have no actors of color nominated at all. And I'm sure, going down the line into the more technical categories, I'm going to assume probably a lot of whiteness there, but we don't really see the faces of those individuals. So, everybody's been talking about, the hashtags Oscars so white.
Whitest Oscars ever.
Whitest Oscars whitest Oscars ever. So, let's just talk about this.
Is it the whitest Oscars ever?
Certainly, it seems from what I've read in the most recent years. And I'm talking maybe covering the past 20 years.
Yeah,
It's definitely one of the
it's
whitest.
a little bit of a stretch to say that it's the whitest Oscars ever. I could think of some times in the 50s when it was pretty white.
And, there is certainly a lot of question over that. I mean, there was one writer outraged over David Oyelowo not being nominated and asserting that the only time black actors get nominated win is when they play bad characters like Denzel Washington's character in Training Day, which not always the case. He won for Glory, where he played a very positive character.
Yeah.
So not always the case that the only way the Academy is going to nominate a black actor is if they're playing like a bad cop or a drug lord or a negative kind of character.
I just want to make this perfectly clear to everybody listening. This is a very, very touchy subject.
Yes.
And I'm going to try to be as nuanced, and we are going to try to be as nuanced as possible, because this is a complicated subject.
Yes,
I'm going to throw something out. I understand. Look, let's just put this on the table right now. Let me preface all of my statements with this. It is a fact that black actors are highly underrepresented in the industry, in both getting roles.
Right.
You've had to have very wealthy people bankroll films with black casts. You had George Lucas, who literally had to bankroll Red Tape.
Right, and then you have Oprah submit a lot of money to
Selma.
I
believe, were it not for, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, were it not for Oprah's backing, that movie wasn't getting made.
Probably not, and she also backed a lot of other movies in the past couple years that were primarily of black cast. So it is.
And Tyler Perry, I believe his movies, I I don't know if any of them have ever received a nomination.
I don't believe so.
I'm trying to remember, and I can't remember.
Like his personally made movies alone, no. I mean, I believe there's movies he's been in, such as Gone Girl, that have been nominated, but nothing that he directed or wrote.
That's actually him.
Right.
He wrote, directed, or was the actual star of.
Right. And, you know, the LA Times put out this statistic with the Academy voters. 94% white, 77% male, and Academy membership is lifetime.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of people who have not been in the film industry for 40 years.
Yeah.
They've cited, you know, there's some people running bakeries now or working as librarians. They have not made a picture in 40, 50 years.
Yeah. It's just, for me to wrap my head around this, though.
Right.
It's very hard for me to digest this a bit, because last year, what was the winning picture?
The winning picture was 12 Years a Slave.
12 Years a Slave. And, you know, that wasn't the only award it won.
No, it won, I believe, for Best Adapted Screenplay, if I'm not mistaken.
Lupita won.
Lupita Nyong'o won for Best Supporting Actress.
Yeah.
And it was a very heavily nominated movie. I think Michael Fassbender was nominated. I don't think Benedict Cumberbatch was nominated. Yeah. I believe it was nominated for cinematography and possibly editing. And Best Director Steve McQueen was nominated for that.
Yeah.
So it was a very...
And it's just...
It was represented well.
Knowing that, I understand that there's certainly a due outrage. I get it. But I don't know if... It's just very hard for me to honestly say that the reason that Selma isn't as represented as it should be is because of the racial bias of the Academy. It's very hard. I actually think there's something else going on. And I'll put this out there, and maybe you could agree or disagree with this, but if you were following the coverage of Selma, the big controversy around Selma was the portrayal of Lyndon Baines Johnson, the president at the time. A lot of people in the mainstream media, especially the Washington media, were outraged at his portrayal, saying that it was an unfair portrayal, that he was actually more supportive of civil rights than he came across in the film.
Right.
And I think that with all of the connections that the people in Washington have, the media circles especially, I think a lot of there was basically a whole campaign to discredit the movie Selma, and the director, and they went after her hard.
Yes, and I have to say I do
and
like
I
her.
think that might have something to do more with it than perhaps the outright just racial bias of the Academy, being that 12 Years a Slave was the winning picture last year.
Right, and you know, I do like Anne DuVernay's explanation for the portrayal. She has said that, you know, she's defended Lyndon Johnson, saying that he was a huge help to the civil rights movement, but she said that that Selma is made through the lens of the black experience, and that a lot of Hollywood movies, the lens is through a white perspective. So naturally, you know, I'm sure Martin Luther King and a lot of black civil rights leaders, you know, early on, it did take Johnson a bit of time to get on board.
And
so
by
they
the
may
way,
have...
I'm in total agreement with this. I'm not criticizing the director. I think if it is true that Selma
Right, and I do think that, you know, this political move is certainly playing an effect here.
Yeah.
Especially since, you know, you do have a lot of older white voters who may be more sympathetic to the Johnson side.
Yeah, I think it's more political than it is racial at the end of the day. And by the way, I'm not saying that that's right. I believe that what she was doing was very much like what, you know, historians like Howard Zinn, what they do. Howard Zinn, he wrote a history book called The People's History of the United States. And it got a lot of criticism as, you know, like being far left, like propaganda,
like revisionist
hogwash.
history.
And when all it was based on the sources, not of the leaders, but
Right.
of the people, the common people actually living in those times.
Right. He wrote a history book that was from the perspective of the oppressed.
Yeah.
Whether that oppression be racial, sexual,
Right.
Economic,
Class-based.
class, it came from the other side.
And I think that's what the director of Selma was trying to do, and I think
Right.
I think she did it well enough to have sparked this controversy, because
Right.
it is true. You do not get a lot of black perspective. And by the way, I do believe that's why Oprah had to come and step in, because the establishment that runs Hollywood, it's mainly white. I don't
Right,
think
yeah.
it
That's
takes
not-
a lot of
yeah.
imagination to see it. It's mainly male, and they are a lot of them are of a certain age, and that's one of the reasons why you have a lot of films from the perspective of white people, because most of the people in the industry in the high positions like directors and writers and etc. are white. So you're seeing a lot of white perspective, but when you see the black perspective portrayed, it is different.
Right.
And that is what I think is the source of the controversy. Not so much racial bias again, but political bias.
Right.
Honestly.
And
I could be wrong.
There is a statistical anomaly of sorts here. So you have Selma nominated for Best Picture, which I think is the Academy's way of acknowledging the film and sort of trying to blunt the controversy over not nominating Anne and not nominating David, because all the best pictures all the best directors that are nominated this year, their film is nominated for Best Picture except for one director, and that is Bennett Miller for Foxcatcher.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting, because it's almost the Academy saying your direction is good enough to get a nomination, but the film itself is not good enough for Best Picture. And the flip side for Selma is your film's good enough to get a Best Picture nomination, but your work as the director is not good enough. And if Selma won Best Picture, it'll become the 5th film to win without the director of the film being nominated in the history of the Academy Awards, which is highly unusual.
But that's also, again, in part due to the rules. Only a certain number of...
Right, because
I believe it's 5.
5 director, but you're allowed to nominate, I believe, up to 10
Yeah.
Best Pictures.
Best Pictures.
And, my point...
5 actors, 5 directors,
right,
5 writers.
But you could have 10 Best Pictures.
Right.
And, it is...
And that's a new addition, too,
Yes,
by the way.
I believe they made that after the outrage over the Dark Knight not getting nominated for Best Picture, despite the nominations for a lot of the technical awards, the editing, the sound mixing, and Heath Ledger being nominated for Best Supporting Actor.
It was also a way for the Academy Awards ceremonies to expand its base.
Because you're going to have films that aren't necessarily artistic getting nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, more commercial
films. Right. So it'll be interesting to see. The trend seems to be moving towards, one of 3 pictures winning Best Picture, and that's Boyhood, Birdman, or The Grand Budapest Hotel. They have been the ones doing very well on the awards circuit right now.
And we'll talk more about that next week when
Right.
we will include our Oscar predictions,
Yes.
which is a yearly routine between
Yes.
Tony Thomas and myself.
Yes, and just throwing this out here as a preview, there is talk that we're going to see another split of Best Picture, Best Director.
Oh, yeah. No.
Which, past 2 years there has been a split, and it seems to be more common in this decade.
I think I know where you're going with
Right,
this.
a quarter of films.
You're going to say Birdman is going to win Best Picture, and Richard Linklater is going to
Flip it.
Are you serious?
I'm flipping it. I think
Wow.
Boyhood wins Best Picture, but Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu, I'm sorry, probably butchered the last name. I think he wins Best Director, but I think Boyhood wins Best Picture, because the Directors Guild Award gave it to Alejandro, if I'm not mistaken, and that's the better bellwether for who wins Best Picture. I believe the last 10 Directors Guild Award winners have won Best Director.
Yeah. Well, like I said...
Though I do certainly think that the flip side,
I'm not gonna
Birdman
lie.
Best Picture, Richard winning Best Director, I think that's the other likely That's the other likely scenario here.
This is going to be an interesting year.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to lie, never have more categories been more competitive.
Right.
This year.
Right, and the only one that seems a surefire is J.K. Simmons winning Best Supporting Actor.
Without a doubt.
And you could argue Julianne Moore may have Best Actress wrapped up.
I think you could more than argue that, but
right.
I think. But here's the thing: we're getting a little too much into what we should be doing next week. The other topic involving the politics of the Oscars,
yes,
American Sniper.
Yes, probably the most controversial by far film.
This has gotten a lot of media attention.
Right.
The basic. It all began essentially with a tweet by Michael Moore when he said that, and again, I'm paraphrasing, that his grandfather in World War II was shot by a sniper, and that he was brought up to believe that snipers are not heroes.
And he tweeted that on or around the anniversary of Martin Luther King's death, who was killed by a sniper. And Moore went on to clarify that his tweet was not meant to be directed towards American Sniper, because he went on to explain from a technical aspect he enjoyed the film. He had issues with the politics of the film, but he thinks, on the merits of filmmaking itself, he enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But
but
his explanation, of course, was largely ignored, and the culture war over American Sniper began.
Once you're in the midst of a culture war, nuance is always the first casualty.
Yes,
and that's what we're going to attempt here. We're going to try to have a nuanced conversation. We're again, the topic is the politics of the Oscars.
Yeah.
So we're not going to provide like a review or
because both of us have yet to see this film.
Right, and we're not going to do any justice. We're not going to be those types of people. We're going to provide a review of a film that we have not seen. Okay, and a lot of people do that.
Yes,
especially
on both sides.
Especially in the midst of a culture war, everybody has an opinion on this film.
Right. Well, look at The Interview. A lot of people didn't see that film, and yet
everybody had
a very detailed opinion on that.
So what we're going to talk about, my view of the film, not of the film, because
the subject matter.
The subject matter. The film is based around the life of Chris Kyle. He is considered to be the sniper with the most kills in American military history.
Yes.
And he wrote a book
titled American Sniper.
A memoir of his own experiences within the Iraq War. And there have been many people who have read it and pointed out some of the things that he said were not in line with what we as Americans generally consider to be heroic.
Right.
I'll give you a for instance, and I'm paraphrasing here. You could look up the quotes yourselves. He essentially said, "I enjoy killing."
Right, and he referred frequently to Iraqis as savages, and had a very anti-Iraqi slant in that book. And I'm not just talking about the people he fought against, the terrorists,
and by the way,
the Iraqi army.
The defense has always been, well, it wasn't he talking about the people he's targeting.
Right, but if you look up those quotes, I'm going to try and pull one up here. He often referred, if I'm not mistaken, to the Iraqi people.
Yeah, and let me just say that when I read some of the quotes, I'm sorry. It bothered me on a moral level. I understand, it is war, and when you're at war, it's probably psychologically best if you dehumanize the enemy. I mean, that is how all soldiers at all times have coped with the act of killing other human beings. But there's a difference between had the guy believed that he was doing what he was doing because he was just protecting his fellow soldiers. I can totally understand that. Right. If he would have, if what he believed and felt was, look, we're in a war, I am loyal to my fellow soldiers, they are my brothers, they are my sisters, I'm going to kill anybody that tries to kill them. I would not have a problem with that. However, you cross a moral line, in my opinion, and in the opinion of most religions and philosophies, when you take pleasure in killing other human beings. That is inflicting harm or death on another human being and taking joy from it is called sadism. It's also a symptom of sociopathy or being a sociopath. That, to me, is very troubling.
Right.
When you come out and literally say, I enjoy killing.
Right, and there's the also issue of Kyle being a liar. He made claims about shooting looters in Hurricane Katrina, a claim that has never been substantiated. And there was also the famous court case over him claiming to punch Jesse Ventura, which the court has sided with Jesse on that he was, that Chris was lying about him and damaged his character, because I believe the allegation was Jesse made a comment disparaging towards Navy SEALs or towards some kind of military group.
And Jesse claims he did not make that.
Right. He claims that he never even met the man.
Yeah.
And so you have that issue as well that, Chris apparently at the very least is a great exaggerator if you take a more skeptical look at his book.
Yeah.
But he has made very black and white comments as in his opinions of the war, describing Muslims as savage, despicable evil, and making other very maybe this was his way of dealing with it, but he did not really have a very nuanced opinion of the war.
Yeah, no, and by the way, back then, not many people were thinking in terms of nuance. As far as,
Right.
I mean, just think about the Bush era in general.
Right.
It was not really a time of nuance. But
You were either with us or against us,
correct.
kind of mentality.
But again, let me just point out that even George W. Bush said that we are not at war with Muslims.
Right.
And it seems like Chris Kyle
Was at war with Muslims.
You can easily be led
Right.
to believe that.
Especially when you have a quote from the book where he writes, quote, "I hate the damn savages. I couldn't give a flying fuck about the Iraqis," which to me, that's not really a very...
That's a very generalized term, and that
Right.
it's very easy to interpret that as meaning the entire people of Iraq.
Right, and a lot of the fan reaction to the film, you've had some very jingoistic takes on this film from people who have seen it, and you could Google the Twitter screen caps of fans who have seen this movie, talking about how it made them want to kill Muslims or Iraqis, and just go off about in a very violent way.
Yeah, and look, by the way, the actual they screened this movie for actual military personnel, and their reaction was totally different from civilians.
Right.
When the most of the people in the military who saw this film, reports showed that it was a silent audience.
Right.
These were people who were looking at it and they recognized something in it, the horror of war. I mean,
Right.
they were not rooting, they
Right.
were not cheering. So
Right.
the
And
culture war, by the way,
Yeah.
is not being fought by military personnel.
No.
It is being fought by people who have never seen a day of war in their entire lives, who have never had a bullet fly past their
Right.
head. And that all of a sudden they think they're 5-star armchair generals
Right.
who are going to, and fight the war. No, this is not what that
Right.
movie should be about. It is not what this country should be about.
Right, and you've seen with the military reaction to the film, there have been a lot of veterans quoted saying, the film does a very good job at picking up like the horror of war, the psychological toll that it has, which, Clint and the screenwriter, they have said in interviews that their purpose in making this film was not to be pro-war, anti-war, but to show the psychological damages. Clint has argued that the film is anti-war because it shows the damage that war does to one's mind and the effect that it has on people. But not everybody going to see this film is going to see that. A lot of people, I feel, go to a movie like this to see something patriotic.
Right. And some of the more legitimate criticisms of the film is perhaps they could have focused more on the trauma of post-traumatic stress disorder. But they do show it. They do show from what I've read of it, they do show
how difficult his life is when he's not with his wife, right?
Yeah.
And there have been some criticisms of the portrayal of Iraqis in the film that they're always referred to as savage, but we'll have to judge that on our own merit.
We are going to talk about. We will be reviewing American Sniper, and providing a more in-depth opinion of the film itself. Right. Today was just about the circus that has
proliferated around this film, and your take on do you think the politics of the film, since it's sort of risen up, in the wake of the nominations, is that going to hurt it at any of the categories where it's expected to do well, such as sound mixing and some of the more technical awards?
I think it actually has a very, very good shot of picking up some of the more technical awards, especially sound mixing, like you just said. I think this is hard. Look, politics plays a major part in all of the award ceremonies,
right?
Especially the Oscars. Like we just said, it is very possible that Selma, the movie, was a victim of the politics of the Oscars.
Right.
American Sniper, honestly, it could go either way. Even if the politics weren't around the film,
right,
I don't think Bradley Cooper would be the front runner. I still don't.
No, and from what I've seen, it's Michael Keaton or Eddie Redmayne that are.
That's it.
They're neck and neck.
Yeah, and I really feel like the politics surrounding it wouldn't have mattered that much, because again, they're judging the actors on their performance. And I don't think anybody in their right mind is going to say that Bradley Cooper, because he portrayed Chris Kyle, in any way, shape, or form reflects the views or opinions of Chris Kyle himself. And he shouldn't be blamed or hated for it at all. That he's an actor. His job is to be a living representative of the person.
Right.
Body and soul.
Right. And looking back, Clint had a lot of controversy with his two World War II movies that came out, Flags of Our Fathers and The Sands of Iwo Jima, because he was criticized heavily for the film that portrayed that battle from the side of the Japanese. He was accused of being too sympathetic and being maybe a little bit too anti-war with that one.
Yeah, look,
so Clint's not. He doesn't strike me as the.
Is he a Republican? Yes. But is he like a fanatic?
No, and he's not one of those, all war is great kind of Republicans.
No.
And speaking of war films and the controversy over the portrayal of the Iraqis in this film, I'm going to watch this with an interesting lens, because you have a lot of World War II movies at times sometimes humanize the Germans. And recently I saw the World War II movie with Brad Pitt, Fury, which was an excellent film. One of the most graphically violent World War II movies out there. And that's because the director said he wanted to portray the horror of war. And there's a moment towards the end of the film where the last surviving member of the tank group is hiding underneath the tank, pretending to be dead and out of sight. And a young Nazi who has to be just about this guy's age, early 20s, sees him, and they look at each other. And there's a brief moment of compassion and humanity amongst the two, because the Nazi soldier looks the other way and lets the guy go. So I wonder if, some of the controversy with American Sniper would be taken away if they humanized some of these the Iraqi and Muslim characters in the film. But when we look at that film, that's something I'm going to be looking for.
I honestly this thing became a culture war not because of the portrayal of the Iraqis. This became a culture war because of people's reactions to Chris Kyle.
Right, but a lot of the left-wing criticism of the film has been, like Noam Chomsky, for example, has argued against the portrayal of Iraqis and Muslims in this film, and that's sort of like the left's canon.
Yeah, criticism.
Right, but from a cultural perspective...
Listen, that's going to happen no matter what. Okay, listen, that... We as members of the left, we're going to criticize the portrayal of the occupied peoples no matter what, and I don't think that was going to necessarily become a cultural issue.
That was. I'm going to disagree here. That for the left, that's been one of the reasons.
For the left, but I'm talking about the grand culture war that's been fought over this film that became part of the mainstream culture, where you heard about it nonstop for like 2 weeks?
Well, yes, it's
two
Chris Kyle.
2 fucking weeks. It was Chris
Kyle.
Chris Kyle,
hero.
He was either hero or blood Satanist. I mean, no matter what, and then that became the culture war. Yes, I understand that the left is going to criticize the portrayal of the people. They did it with Black Hawk Down. They did.
Right.
Look, that is what we do as members of the left.
Speaking of,
we always stick up for the occupied peoples, or the oppressed peoples. That is what we do. Is it going to become part of the cultural narrative? Probably not.
Well, speaking of cultural narratives, one of the narratives, going back to Selma, was, I've been listening to some podcasts on film recently and reading up a lot on the Oscar talk, and there have been some suggestions from people in the film community that solely based on Anne DuVernay's achievement as a black female director, the argument is the Academy should have essentially thrown her a bone and nominated her anyway.
I would. Are you going to ask me, do I agree or disagree?
Judging from your look here, you are probably...
I had a grimace.
Yes, I think you're disagreeing.
Yeah, I think that's highly insulting to her.
And I agree.
I think that...
I agree.
I think that if just the idea of being thrown a bone...
Right.
Like, with that mentality, I'm being treated like a dog.
Right.
A bone.
Or essentially a child that... loses the contest, but gets the consolation prize.
No, I would be
agree.
Highly insulted.
I agree.
I would want to...
Because that, to me, is saying, we're nominating you because of, your identity, not because we feel... Right, it's sympathy.
We feel bad for you.
That's...
Fuck that shit. I would
agree.
be so outraged over... I would probably be more outraged over that than being passed over because of political bias.
Right.
I mean, that's the racial shit right there. That would be racial.
That would be. And it just, the whole point,
give her, look,
you look at this,
she got fucked. All right, she got fucked real bad because of what I'm interpreting to be political bias, on the part of people attacking her for her portrayal of LBJ. That's fucking bullshit, and I'm outraged about that. But I'll tell you, I'd be even more outraged if it came out that they nominated her just because
she's a black woman.
They felt bad for her,
right? And to me, that's just
that is horrific to her. She deserves better than that.
And that's your white guilt, your white privilege. Here are we,
that's racial, and that's that would be a racial component to the story, a true racial component to the story that would be blatant.
Yes, and
this is more ambiguous because I think again,
there might be politics at play.
There's politics at play,
right?
Definitely,
and
I think.
To me,
I could be wrong.
If that were, if that scenario happened and it came out that she was nominated because of her race or her gender, to me that's exacerbating the problem where, they're not looking at her art; they're looking at who she is.
Yeah, I think,
and she should be judged on the merits of her film, not on who she is.
Ideally, this should be
because in a race, the so-called colorblind world, it shouldn't matter that she's a black woman. No. She should be judged the same way that...
This should be a meritocratic process. They should be judged on their skill and their skill alone.
Yes.
But again, politics always invades the Oscars.
Yes.
It's been a part of it for as long as I can remember.
Well, even last year with 12 Years a Slave winning, there were accusations of politics there because I believe it came out that... some members of the Academy admitted to not even seeing the picture. They just solely voted for it because of the content. And the artistic community, and you may agree to this, felt that Gravity was the deserving film.
Yeah, there were a lot of people who thought that Gravity should have won the best picture because of just
the beauty of
what it does
yeah.
as a film. It's telling a story through pure visuals,
right? And the mind blowingness of the cinematography,
yeah.
the special effects, and the Alfonso Cuarón's vision in that film.
Yeah,
like you
it was
show
a
that
tough one.
It was a tough one, and it's one where it felt so organic when they're in space. It felt so real.
I'm not going to lie, and hate me all you want, but I would say that if I were a member of the Academy, I probably would have voted for Gravity.
And I probably would have voted for Gravity as well. And even going back to 2004 when Crash
and
won.
that has nothing to do with race. I'm just looking at the film from, the perspective of, cinematography, directing, storytelling. Would Lupita Nyong'o still would have won?
Yes. I think so. She was fantastic. Yes. And 12 Years a Slave is a great film. I just would have voted for Gravity. And there was the controversy in 2004 over Crash winning. A lot of people felt that was the Academy essentially playing politics and nominating that film and having it win Best Picture. And if I'm not mistaken, did that beat Brokeback Mountain?
It did.
Yes. And a lot of people felt that Brokeback Mountain was the more deserving film.
But even then, people were saying that politics was at play with Brokeback Mountain.
Yes. Same when Sean Penn won for his portrayal of Harvey Milk.
Yeah, exactly.
You're always going to have these accusations that the liberal left in Hollywood is going to, pick the more pick the movies and the films that are more in line with their sort of take on reality.
With Jared Leto for Dallas Buyers Club. The politics of accusations of politics within the Oscars is nothing new.
Right.
Sometimes it's warranted, and sometimes it's just total bullshit. I mean, people make these accusations, I think, because they're bitter or upset, and a lot of it is coming from the people who are on the losing end of the Oscars. I really do. And a lot of those it's well known that you campaign for an Oscar.
Yes.
Whenever you look at websites like Hollywood Reporter, you'll see the ads for your consideration. It's bought and paid for by the studios and the producers. They're campaigning for their movie. There are campaigns for movies.
Yes.
And just like actual political campaigns, there are shadow campaigns, meaning basically there's a campaign afoot to discredit certain films.
Yes.
And they'll never admit to it. It's all shadow. You'll never see the actors. You'll never see the writer or the director come out and say what they really think. But I I do think that Selma could possibly have been the victim of a shadow campaign. I just saw. I mean, if you watched like the media coverage, I think Chris Matthews on his show Hardball, he had some guests on, like historians that were bashing the movie Selma.
Yes,
bashing it,
and
because of the portrayal of LBJ.
Right, and for has there ever really been an Academy Award winning film that's historical in nature, that's been completely 100% accurate? No. Even with American Sniper, they take liberties.
Their job.
No,
they're not documentary.
Exactly. There are always going to be decisions made on representation or even chronology for artistic purposes.
I mean, that's really the whole point of making a film narrative. It's a narrative. You're doing the best you can, and you're focusing on some things more than you are on others, and that's just the name of the game, people. Yes. It's just the name of the game.
Right. Well, next week we do have a very exciting Oscars for a change. I mean, the past couple of years have been a little bit more
very
predictable.
Very predictable.
There were a few categories.
But this one, there are multiple categories.
Right. Best Picture is who knows, Birdman, Selma, Boyhood.
This is the first time where, as long as we've been doing this,
yes,
where I'm fretting about Best Picture.
Right.
Remember, we have our little Oscar ballots.
Yes.
And we would always assign like a certain point system
right.
for Best Picture.
Right.
And Best Picture would always get the most points. Like
it's the big award.
5 points or something like that. We would always give to that, and that was just like we've always thought it as like a throwaway 5 points.
Yeah.
A lot of our Oscar ballots,
they were won and lost in the smaller categories because when
right about when we would get to Best Actor or Best Actress
right.
or something like that, or Best Director.
Right.
I won one time because of Best Director.
Right,
for
and
instance.
it was mathematically impossible
Right.
for me to have won. And last year when I bested
and you
him,
threw a shit fit about it.
And when I bested you last year, it was
for the first time
ever. It came down to, I believe, Best Original Screenplay. I opted for Spike Jonze's Her, and you picked something else.
Yeah, I don't.
That because I remember you switching it, but that was usually it's won and lost in the trenches, and who picked best short film.
Yes.
This year,
it could the deciding vote could very
right.
well be the Best Picture.
Best Picture could be Best Director. You have Best Actor, where it's odds are Eddie Redmayne or Michael Keaton, but it's 50-50.
This is a super competitive.
Even
year.
with the screenplays, Best Adapted Screenplay. Imitation Game was getting a lot of love early on, but now Theory of Everything's getting some love.
I can't tell you how difficult this is going to be.
And even Best Editing, Best Original Screenplay. Like
this is going to be the hardest Oscars
right?
ever,
because
I think,
you have
to decide on
several big juggernaut films that have a lot of nominations. You have Birdman, Boyhood, Grand Budapest Hotel, and it's difficult this year. There's going to be a lot of splits, I believe.
Oh yeah. I don't know if this is going to from what I'm seeing, I don't think this is going to be I'll be very surprised if this is a clean sweep year.
No.
I don't think we've had a clean sweep year in a long time. I don't remember.
I can't remember the last.
I remember.
I want to say probably maybe Return of the King.
Yeah, it was Return of the King. I remember.
That one
clean sweep.
That's the last one I remember.
When I think of clean sweep, I think of Titanic.
Right.
I think of the Return of the King.
Right.
But after those, I don't remember too many legitimate clean sweeps.
Right, where they won every award they were nominated for.
No.
But it will be a very interesting year, and there's a lot going on in television as well. Better Call Saul episode 3 tonight. Walking Dead.
Oh yes.
A lot of interesting rumors in the works that we will be getting to next week as we filter through some of them.
Indeed. So, if you're ever in the mood for a box of reviews, rants, and rumors, join us on Burnt Popcorn.
Okay. How long do we get?